And before I start, I would really like to thank you for welcoming me. I've looked forward to visiting for so long. And I have to say, the people here have been so friendly, but also so optimistic. And it's something that I don't see that often. So it's a real pleasure to be interacting with such creative, friendly, optimistic people. I want to start by telling you a short story. When I was a second-year professor, I was at the Kellogg School of Management then at Northwestern University, and I was asked to give a lecture on my area of expertise at the University of Chicago. And did anyone go to the University of Chicago? All right. So the University of Chicago's sort of unofficial slogan is, "Where fun goes to die." Right? So it's not a place where people are known to be especially warm and friendly, and everyone is afraid to give a talk at the University of Chicago. But when I think about this, I'm an expert. I'm going in to talk about my area of expertise. I'm in a leadership position. But I went and I felt so powerless. I stumbled over my words. I went into fight or flight mode in the middle of my talk. I finished it, but I left with a sense of regret. I did not leave feeling satisfied. I left wishing that I could have a do-over. And that's the kind of situation that I want to ask you to think about. I want you to think first about what is, as a leader, what's your biggest challenge? Think about a situation that you approach with dread, that you execute with a sense of anxiety and distraction, and that you leave with a sense of regret. So everyone has this kind of situation. It varies from person to person. It might be public speaking. It might be interacting with one person. It might be giving negative feedback. It might be giving difficult news to someone. What is that situation for you? And how can you approach it instead with composure and confidence and execute it without being distracted, being present, and leave it with a sense of satisfaction? Why can't we do that? We can't do that because we have a sense of powerlessness. And I want to differentiate between two types of power because I think the word power often scares people. Social power is what people think of when they think of power. It is power over other people. It is the ability to control others' states, others' behaviors, control over resources, and it is zero-sum. It's a fixed pie. The more power one person has, the less power others have. And I'm not saying that it's bad or wrong. It's a necessity, but it's not the only kind of power. The kind of power that I want you to think about is this. It's personal power. It's the power to. It's the ability to control our own states and our own behaviors, and it's infinite. So you can have enormous personal power, and it doesn't take power away from anyone else, right? So this is the kind of power that benefits all of us, because what happens is that when we feel powerful, hundreds of psychological studies have shown that when we feel powerful, it activates what we call the behavioral approach system. And you can think of this as a sort of system telling our brains that everything is safe, that you're okay. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But powerlessness, on the other hand, so when I walked into that talk at the University of Chicago and I was feeling powerless, what happened was that I was activating the behavioral inhibition system. That's an alarm threat system. So basically what my brain was telling me is that I was being chased by a tiger, and I wasn't being chased by a tiger. I was just dealing with some people who weren't that friendly. So my reaction to that, my nervous system response, was not adaptive, right? It didn't help me because it wasn't an actually dangerous situation. So how do we instead activate that approach system when we're going into those situations? When the approach system is activated, and think about all of these qualities together, it affects your emotions, it affects your thoughts, it affects your behaviors, it affects your outcomes. We see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities. We see other people, even strangers. I saw the people in that audience as predators. But when the approach system is activated, we see them as allies, as friends. When the approach system is activated, we have an abundance mindset. We're not worried about getting everything that we can get right away. We don't have a scarcity mindset. We feel secure. We don't feel defensive. We are more likely to act, not just on behalf of ourselves, but also on behalf of others. So think about this. When you look at studies of bravery, of people who step in emergencies and actually help a stranger, the best predictor is that sense of power. If people feel a personal sense of power, of agency, they are much more likely to step in and help a stranger in an emergency. So this is a kind of power that we all can be comfortable with, because when you look at these things together, when we feel personally powerful, we are more optimistic and open, we are creative and more cognitively agile, we're authentic, we are confident in a way that's calm and calming to other people. We are able to listen to others because we don't feel defensive. We are less stressed, we're even more generous, and we are ready to take action. And these are all good qualities, right? So we want to activate that approach mindset, because when you look at this together, what you see is that when the approach system is activated, we are present. We are present, and that is what good leadership is. It is the ability to be present in the most stressful situations, to hear what's actually happening, not what we're worried is happening, right? So when I was giving that talk at the University of Chicago, I was worried about what they were thinking about me. I wasn't thinking about what they were thinking. I wasn't able to actually pay attention to what they were thinking. What were their questions? Because I was so worried about what they were thinking about me. When we are present, we are able to hear people, to see them, to respond to them, to understand their interests, right? All of these things are things that we need to do well. Because when you look at studies of venture capital pitch competitions, debate competitions, studies of job interviews, of college interviews, what we see is that when people are present, they show three qualities that make them far more compelling. The first is that they believe their story. I mean, think about that. If you don't believe your story, how can anyone else believe your story, right? You have to believe what you're selling. You have to buy what you're selling. If you expect anyone else to buy it, why would they buy it if you wouldn't buy it? The second is that we convey confidence without arrogance. Confidence is a tool, arrogance is a weapon, right? Confidence invites people in, arrogance shuts people out. The third is that when we are present, we communicate in a way that's natural and harmonious. The words that we're speaking and the emotions that we convey with the words match the body language. When we're not present, we might get the words right, but we get all nervous and discombobulated, and we try to choreograph our movement, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't come across as authentic, and it's not compelling. When you look at these three qualities together, the qualities of being present, what you see is these people not only do better in these VC pitch competitions, debate competitions, job interviews, but they also stay at the job longer, they inspire others, they are much more likely to ascend to positions of leadership. Presence is such an important quality and signal and state when it comes to leadership, because also presence begets presence. When we are present with others, we invite them to be present with us. When you think about interacting with someone who's distracted, who's looking over your shoulder, waiting for somebody else to come into the room, or distracted by their phone, when they are not present, you're not going to give them your full authentic self. You're going to hold back a bit because you don't know if you can trust them. We need to be present with others if we want them to be present with us. And that's because the only way to build sustainable relationships as a leader is to earn and build trust, because trust is the conduit of influence. You might have a million great ideas, but if you have not earned, established, built trust, if you have not shown people that you understand and care about them, they can't hear what you're saying. Trust is absolutely critical to leadership in any situation. In any situation. It is the medium through which ideas travel. Without that medium, you may as well just be throwing ideas against a brick wall and seeing them bounce right back off. They're not being received by your audience. When we feel personally powerful, not only do we show up, but we show up as both strong and as generous, as both competent and as kind. And these are the two important qualities of leadership. People perceive each other immediately, within seconds, on these two qualities, generosity and kindness, and competence and strength. These are the two questions that we ask about other people when we meet them. Can I trust them? And so sort of, what are their intentions toward me? And are they capable of enacting those intentions? Those are the two questions that we're asking. So when we are feeling powerful, we're able to be fully present. So if power is activating the approach system, and powerlessness is activating the inhibition system, then power is cultivating presence, and powerlessness is blocking presence. So again, this is not social power, it's personal power. And it's key to being an effective communicator, an effective leader. I want you to check your posture. You don't have to adjust, but just pay attention to how you're sitting. We spend a lot of the day sitting. And your posture, even when you're seated, when you are a passive observer, matters, right? It's actually sending information to your brain about whether you're in a safe situation or an unsafe situation. Your body and your mind are constantly talking to each other. They're in communication. We talk a lot about sort of the mind-body connection, but less so about the body-mind connection. We think about how our mind changes our health, but we don't think so much about how we carry ourselves physically changes our mindset. And it is critically important and something we can do easily. When you look at power, the research on power and body language really started in the animal kingdom. And researchers for more than 150 years have noticed that animals that have power expand. They take up more space. You see this among other primates. You see it in non-primate species. You can clearly see who's in charge here, right? Standing up on the hind legs. You see it in snakes, in birds. Expansiveness is signaling status and power. And think of the peacock raising and fanning its tail feathers. It's the ultimate display of power and status. So it's true for animals, but it's also true for people. So a researcher named Jessica Tracy has studied this across 36 cultures on 5 continents, but it started with her observation when she was watching the Olympics that not only do gymnasts pose like this before and after the routine, so you see them pop up with their arms in the air, their chin is lifted, their mouth is slightly open, chest is expanded, but what she noticed is that you also see it in a way that's not choreographed. In the moment of victory, in the moment of feeling that burst of power, what do people do? All over the world, this is what they do. Right? In that moment of winning, they expand across different kinds of athletics, across countries, across cultures, across genders. You see the same kinds of reactions in that moment of victory, which is to be as expansive as possible. You can see many different examples. It doesn't matter. It could be an endurance sport. It could be a team sport. But you see the same reactions. Even when our team is winning, we do the same thing because we vicariously have a sense of power. We're not really responsible for their victory, but we feel responsible. We call that basking in reflected glory, and we feel a sense of power, and so we expand. But I think the most convincing evidence that Dr. Tracy found in her studies on 5 continents, where everyone she interacted with expanded when they won, is that even congenitally blind people did the same thing. So people who have never seen anyone expand when they win. They have the same reaction. What that tells us is this is hardwired. This is a hardwired response. This is just like smiling in happiness or widened eyes and surprise. It's a universal expression of an emotion. So what happens when we feel powerless? Exactly the opposite. You can see here the fans of the winning team and the losing team, right? You can see what people do. We start to cover our mouths. We make ourselves smaller. Look at the teams as they're losing. You see them touching their heads and their faces, wrapping themselves up, getting closer to the ground, making themselves small. Exactly the opposite of what we do when we feel powerful. And the same thing happens in the animal kingdom. You see the same thing. The animals that don't have power make themselves very small. They pull their tail between their legs. They flatten their hair, get on the ground. They flatten their ears. You can see clearly which animal feels powerless. So across the animal kingdom, around the world, when we feel powerful, we expand. And when we feel powerless, we shrink. So why does this matter? It matters because we can reverse engineer feeling powerful by changing how we carry ourselves. So when people think about how to change their mindset when they're feeling stressed, they think about self-talk, about telling themselves that actually they're going to do great, that they're fine. The problem is that when we are not trusting ourselves, when we're feeling anxious already, self-talk doesn't work. It doesn't work because now we feel like we're lying to ourselves. But we can change the way we carry ourselves, and that will change the way we feel. So I am going to just very quickly show you a number of ways to do this that's based on studies from now across the last 2 decades from all over the world in experimental laboratory settings. So let's start at the top. How do we expand? Well, first, we expand by breathing. We can breathe expansively or in a way that's more contractive. So when we breathe deeply and slowly, it makes us feel more powerful. And I'll give you a very simple way to do this. This is called 4-7-8 breathing. It triggers what we call the relaxation response. It makes us feel more powerful before we go into those stressful situations. So we're going to just quickly do this. I'm going to count to 4. Then I'll count to 7, and I'll count to 8. On the first 4 counts, you inhale. The second 7 counts, you hold your breath. On the last 8 counts, you exhale. Now, you can do this yourself, and if you repeat it just a few times, you really feel the effects. So let's get started. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is your nervous system telling you that you're not being chased by a tiger, that you are safe. And it calms you down and makes you feel more confident. Let's talk about the next one, voice. Voice is not just, speaking is not just about the words that we say, but also the many qualities of voice. So what's our tone? How much amplitude do we use? How much range do we use? How quickly or slowly do we speak? Research at the Stanford Graduate School of Business has shown that not only do we speak more slowly when we feel powerful, but getting people to speak more slowly causes them to feel more powerful. So a researcher named Deb Grunfeld had people read sentences scrolling across the screen quickly or slowly. When they read them slowly, they felt significantly more powerful and more in charge. So think about that in these moments, these big challenges. Slowing your speech, pausing. These are powerful moves. They make us feel powerful, and they also signal power. Let's talk about simple posture. Just sitting up straight, which so many of us were told to do by our grandparents, by our parents, as a show of respect to others. But what researchers find is that it's not just a show of respect to others. When people sit up straight for just 2 to 3 minutes, when you look at people with major depressive disorder, you see a significant reduction in depression symptoms, just sitting up straight for 2 to 3 minutes. When you look at people who are not depressed, you also see a significant elevation in mood, in memory of positive events, in the way that they speak about the future, right? So just changing our posture changes our mood. The problem here is that we are often on these devices, and that does affect us as well. So we do have to be mindful of that. We've studied how working on smaller devices versus bigger devices affects our mindset, and you see significant differences. So it's important to be mindful of how you hold your phone, right? And how much time you spend on it. I'm certainly not going to tell anybody to get rid of their phone, but just to be mindful of your posture while you're using it. So simple posture, complex posture, yoga, so many different studies now looking at very expansive postures and the effects that they have. They reduce post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, they reduce anxiety, but they also are showing huge effects for people who are not suffering from these things. So, for example, when people stand in an expansive pose versus a neutral pose, again, for just 2 to 3 minutes, it increases their pain threshold. So their physical threshold for pain increases after just standing like this for a couple of minutes, right? Why? Why is that happening? Because the approach system is being activated. It's telling us that we're safe, that we can approach, that we should not be afraid. It also allows us to carry more weight, to physically perceive that weight as less heavy than if we have been in a neutral or contractive pose. So all of this together, you keep seeing the same pattern. How do we sleep? Do you sleep like this? Or do you sleep like this, right? People sleep in different positions, and this is the general distribution of sleeping positions. And you see that about 40% of people are sleeping in the fetal position, all curled up. And then you have 5% who are in the sort of Usain Bolt starfish position at the end. You can't change the way you sleep very easily. But in our research, what we find is that the way people wake up, the position they're in when they wake up, predicts their mood. So people who wake up more contractive feel significantly less powerful and significantly more anxious than people who wake up stretched out. What can you do about that? Again, you don't want to set an alarm to every 2 hours to change your position, it's because sleep is very important. But what you can do is if you wake up clenched up, don't put your feet on the ground. Take a minute or two and spread out. Just stretch out in bed and then put your feet on the ground. I mean, these are such simple ways in which we carry ourselves with self-respect and pride, and it translates into feeling those things. So this is the way we want to be when we wake up in the morning. We've looked at what happens when you have people adopt postures like this versus postures like this, again, just for between 2 and 5 minutes. And we find that so by the way, they're doing these in rooms alone. They're blind to the hypothesis. They're blind to the conditions. They don't know what the study is about. But what we find is that when people adopt those more expansive poses, which I'll go back to just for a minute, versus these, they feel significantly happier and more powerful and more in charge, but most important, they are more likely to succeed in things like job interviews. We actually put them through stressful job interviews, and we find that job interviewers, so people who are trained to rate applicants, after watching the people who have adopted these powerful postures, these are the people they want to hire. They don't want to hire the people who had been in the contractive postures. And by the way, these people rating the job applicants didn't see these postures. These were done in private. They have no idea that there were differences. They just rated them better overall, and they were significantly more likely to want to hire them. So that's why they're hired. You go back to those qualities of presence, those people who, in privacy, adopted expansive postures versus contractive postures, believed their story, they showed confidence without arrogance, and they communicated in a way that was harmonious. They were present, and that was compelling. And that's why people wanted to follow them, right? These are the qualities that we find appealing in leaders. Finally, even walking. I mean, this is data using motion capture sensors where people are walking on a treadmill with motion capture sensors attached to their major joints. And it's aggregated across thousands of people. But if you look at this, which one of these walkers, as we call them, is feeling more powerful? The one on the left or the one on the right? The one on the left, raise your hand. The one on the right? Right. So this one, and this is a very small difference, but what you see is the strides are longer, the arms have more swing, there's more up and down vertical movement, they're taking up more space. So even walking not only reflects how we feel, but changes how we feel. So you've got all of these together, breathing, speaking, simple posture, complex posture, movement. These are such simple, actionable takeaways, things that you can change immediately. And by the way, I want to point out very clearly, I am not encouraging people to adopt dominant, expansive postures while they're presenting. You see some people stand on stage like this, and it doesn't go over well. And I have to say, after I first started speaking about this work, I got a couple of emails from people who said, I went to a job interview, and I stood in the victory pose, and I didn't get hired. It's like, well, I'm not surprised. This is what you do alone. When you're actually speaking to people, when you're interacting, you want your posture to be confident and open, but also show that you're engaged, that you want to be there. Because remember, it's not just about strength, it's also about trust and engagement and showing that you're interested genuinely. So adopting expansive breathing, speaking, posture, and movement makes people feel powerful, confident, assertive, relaxed, happy. There are now about 150 studies showing this, including studies now even with grade school children showing that it improves their performance in school and their relationships with their teachers and their willingness to ask questions, right? To not just sit there not knowing the answer, but when they adopt an expansive posture privately before they go to school, those kids are more likely to ask questions. So expanding is activating the approach system. Shrinking is activating the inhibition system. So your body is changing your mind. Your mind is changing your behavior. And your behavior is changing your outcomes. This is true for all of us. Expanding is giving us the courage to bring our authentic best selves to our biggest challenges. And as our courage expands, the world of possibilities expands, right? As we become more courageous and we step forward, we approach, the world expands. And we have even more opportunities and more people to meet, more people who can become our allies, right? More people who we can help. And who will help us. So these are qualities that we want as a leader. And if you may feel very personally powerful, But there's someone in your life, someone who works for you, someone maybe in your family who needs this message, right? And again, this is not zero-sum power. This is infinite. We want everyone to feel this way. And I'm going to stop with this takeaway from, I think, one of my most inspirational figures, Dr. Maya Angelou, who said, "Stand up straight and realize who you are, that you tower over your circumstances. Stand up straight." Thank you so much, and I think we're going to have some a question and answer period now, so thank you very much.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency Saeed Al-Nazari, leading Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Leadership Development, to the stage.
Doctor,
Thank you so much. All right.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Shall we stand or sit?
Can sit. Assalamu alaikum. Doctor, your TED Talk is still the second most watched TED Talk of all time, with 67 million viewers. We'll make today's session and the next 10 minutes the most impactful. At this venue, we have managers, leaders, employees, businessmen. Their impact impacts thousands of people,
Yes.
hundreds of people. What is one thing they can start working on tomorrow to be more effective as leaders?
Well, I think, and this is maybe counterintuitive, but one thing that I find extremely sort of empowering and impactful, and if it's okay, I want to return to that University of Chicago example, and then sort of update it. So that did not go well, and I left with a sense of regret. And it was fine, but it didn't go well. After about a year later, I moved to Harvard Business School, where I taught for many years, and I was told when I was about to start teaching by other HBS professors that HBS students are really aggressive and they're like sharks, and if they smell blood in the water, they'll come in for the kill, and that I should be afraid of them and not make any mistakes and go in really strong. And so I really rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. I practiced my material, but I realized I was so anxious. And a couple of days before going in, I realized these people have worked hard to get to Harvard Business School. They're paying a lot of money to be there. They don't want me to fail. They want me to do well. They want to learn. So what I decided to do was to go in with trust, to extend trust to them, to trust that they wanted to be there, that they would allow me to be authentic and make some mistakes, but also to listen to my expertise. And I have to say, the relationships I built with those 95 students last till today. You know, many of them now have families and are doing really wonderful things. Some of you may be here, but it's the idea that when we are leading, we sometimes worry or we assume that people don't want us to do well, or we don't quite trust them. When we extend trust to them, and I know that's a risky thing to do, it's a generous thing to do, we get trust back. So I would say that's one of the things that as leaders, all of us can do starting tomorrow. The next time when you walk into an interaction with someone who you are leading, trust them. Trust that they want to learn from you, that they want you to do well, and you will get that trust right back from them. And that is building long-term sustainable relationships.
And Doctor, beyond the 70 students, you have been working now for 20 years studying people.
Yes.
You have met many leaders. you have research, you have findings, you have surveys. What are the top do's and don'ts for us to be a better version of who we are today?
Well, I would say, first, do see power as personal power. When you can, remember that this is part of our subjective well-being. I mean, I know this is something that's of great interest to this audience. Our emotional well-being is made up not just of happiness and low stress, but also of sense of power. It's important. I mean, we can be happy and not stressed, but that's not enough to allow us to thrive. Right? What allows us to thrive, societies, nations to thrive, is when people have a sense of agency, a sense of power. So I ask you to see power in that regard, and to help to grow power, not just in yourself, but in those around you. Don't see power as...
Doctor, where
Yes.
do we get power from?
Well,
Is it positions? Is it work? Wealth?
so we do, that is social power, right? That's power over other people. That is the kind of power that I think we think of when we think of power. And I'm not saying that's not power. It is a type of power. And it is not innately good or bad. It just is. And that certainly helps. And when we have that kind of power, it helps us as individuals. But the second type, this personal power, this comes from within, and from being in the presence of leaders who allow us to feel and to grow that sense of power. So I would happy to go on from there. If I can give you one more example of a do and a don't. Often before we go into these sort of stressful situations, these challenging situations, we feel a sense of anxiety. It may not be overwhelming, but we feel a sense of anxiety. We notice it, and we say to ourselves silently, oh, I'm really feeling anxious, and I guess that means things aren't going to go well. Experiments show that if we reinterpret our anxiety as excitement, we perform much better. So if you look at things like stage fright, I mean, these experiments have been done looking at singing competitions, debate competitions, all kinds of stressful situations. We are able to change our emotions in one way and not another. Okay, so emotions are either high arousal emotions or low arousal emotions. And they're also either positive or negative. Anxiety is a high arousal, negative emotion. Excitement is a high arousal, positive emotion. It's very hard to change the arousal level, to say to ourselves, keep calm. But we can change the negativity or positivity. So when we say to ourselves, actually, that feeling that I have, maybe it's not anxiety, maybe I'm excited. This is a challenge. So reinterpreting anxiety as excitement rather than saying I'm anxious and this is going to hurt me. So the do, anxiety is excitement. The don't, sitting with the anxiety and just accepting it.
And how can we turn it into a day-to-day thing? Then how do we apply it?
These really are, I know it sounds so simple, but these experiments on anxiety as excitement, for example, are so simple. These also were done at Harvard Business School by a researcher named Alison Wood Brooks. And she literally has people say to themselves, they're randomly assigned to one of three conditions. They either, and before a very stressful event, they either say aloud to themselves, I am anxious, they say, I am excited, or they say nothing. The people who say, I am excited, outperform everyone else, even in things like math competitions, in singing competitions, in situations that they think they will never perform well at. So it's such a simple thing that we can do. Even if you feel a teeny bit of anxiety, say to yourself, you know what, I'm excited, I'm not anxious.
Doctor, life is a mix of ups and downs. Sometimes we feel we have missed it. We didn't do our best in a job interview, in an evaluation meeting, in a speech, and we keep overthinking that we could have done it better.
Yes.
We could have asked another question. We could have showed ourselves in a different way.
Yes.
And that feeling, many people don't prefer to have.
Yes.
How can we deal with it?
So it's interesting because when you think about any kind of challenging situation or interaction, you think about that moment, the interaction itself, but you forget that there's a before, a during, and an after. You know, I talked about dread, which is sort of like borrowing trouble from the future, about what's happening during the interaction where you're distracted and you're not really hearing what people are saying, but the after also matters. And I think people give the least weight to the after. They think, well, it doesn't matter, it's over, or they want a do-over, and you don't get a do-over. What I find is that sense of regret that people have about not showing people who they are, about not really showing up, that is, in a way, the biggest burden. That becomes something that kind of becomes layer on top of each other. So the next time you go into that challenging situation, you're carrying that baggage, that sense of regret. You want to leave feeling satisfied. You have to let it go. You have to say, I don't get a do-over, but here's what I can learn from what happened in that situation. Here's what didn't work for me, here's what did, and here's what I can do a little bit better the next time. Just remember that the sense of regret doesn't serve you.
So, doctor, how can they do a little bit better the next time?
So rather than setting big, grandiose goals that are focused on the outcome, so say you have a goal, you want to land a deal with a client, for example. You may or you may not land that deal because a lot of that is outside of your control. Instead, focus on what can you do in that interaction to really show them who you are, to build trust. So focus on just being a bit more present in that interaction rather than going, I'm going to win next time, right? It's just like New Year's resolutions. They don't work very well because they're too big. There are too many steps to a New Year's resolution. But these little small things, which I call self-nudges, they allow us to perform better in these interactions and not walk away with that sense of regret. We can accept an outcome even if it's not the one that we wanted, as long as we know that we did everything that we could.
Doctor, there is this social media trend where people share their life hacks. What is your life hacks? Stuff that we can adopt.
Well, I mean, first, I do carry myself in a more expansive way now. I mean, I'm mindful of the small things. I know this seems silly, but even, when I'm brushing my teeth, I put a hand on my hip. I make sure that I'm not, crouching over my phone. I pay attention to that. I'm mindful of my body language. And that changes the way I feel enormously. People ask me, 10 years after this TED Talk, do you still power pose before you give a talk? Of course I do, right? It never stops helping. So I'm mindful of that. But I think another hack that's important for us to keep in mind as leaders is that our power, our social power, our hierarchical power, has an effect on the people that we're interacting with, on the people that we're leading. And so I'm now also mindful of the body language of other people. So if I'm interacting with a student, for example, and they start to wrap up and make themselves smaller and sort of move away, I know that somehow trust has been broken, or they are not feeling seen or heard. And it's not in my interest or theirs, Doctor, for me to be domineering.
If that's being themselves?
Yes, exactly.
Do they need to change it? The way they act, the way they look, the way they communicate?
I mean, yeah, we all can improve our body language, but and we can learn little tricks to change our body language. But what we want to do is do that authentically. And so, when we're interacting with somebody who's powerless and they are starting to shut down, we want to sort of lean forward and re-engage with them, be present with them. That will help them to lean in and be present with us. So changing our body language is really about paying attention to ourselves at a kind of internal level and to each other in these interactions where there are power differences.
How can they practice that at home?
Well, it's kind of a funny question because, so my son is 20, and he's a musician and a performer, and so we talk about a lot of these things very often. When he was like 13, 14, and much more likely to be playing video games or on social media, I noticed when he started to collapse, I saw changes in his body language, and they correlated with changes in his mood. He got grumpier. He was more negative. He seemed to feel less confident about himself. So this is interesting. Like, if you have children, practice with your children. Watch their body language. What's affecting their feelings of power and powerlessness, and how can you help them? So what I did with my son Jonah was I just said to him, whenever he started to collapse, I said, put your phone down, put your computer down. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to go outside. We're going to do something active, and it always made him feel better.
Okay, time is out. I'll end it with one more question.
Yes.
There are thousands of books on leadership, articles, talks, podcasts. What is one takeaway you want today's audience to go out with?
I think in the last decade, the research on leadership has shown, not just from a philosophical perspective, but from an empirical perspective, from a data-driven perspective, the power of good listening. I find that young leaders, when they first come into leadership positions, they feel that they need to take the floor first. They need to, if it's a negotiation, they need to drop the anchor. They have to start talking right away before the other person starts talking. But the ones who are the most effective sit and they listen for a little while. And that does a few things. First, it forms a relationship. You've allowed the other person to speak. They feel heard. But you've also collected information. They've told you some things. You understand their interests now. And you can respond now from a more informed perspective. And that is, I think, one of the biggest changes in leadership in the last 10 years that you see taught at the top business schools, in leadership books, is the power of active listening before responding. Listening is not giving away power. Active listening is actually gaining power.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Excellency, for inviting me. It's been such an honor.
Thank you. We'll have a long list of practicing and some of the life hacks that we'll be sharing. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much.
شكرا يعطيك العافية.